Now streaming on Peacock.
Deep in the woods stands a lone door.
What's behind the door? Nightmares. Your worst nightmares.
Time to fight your demons.
Who are you?
I'm a weapon.
This girl is a cold soul killer.
I'm gonna end this thing.
Are you like the Terminator?
The Girl in the Woods. A brand new series. Streaming now. Only on Peacock.
With infinite complacency, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Well, yeah, Sean, so we've been attempting to finally get this recording done for a little while now. We had a little bit of an audio issue going on, but you have rectified that. Thank you so very much. And, within your email, you emailed about all kinds of things. And one of the first things that you brought up, and this is something that comes up all the time when I'm speaking to people, is, oh gosh, well, it's all conjecture. And I'm kind of going, well, is it the land? Is it the house? What's going on? But in your case with some of this stuff, I would definitely hazard to say it was the land. And we're going to get into all this stuff, but holy cow, the place that we are going to speak about has had so much history, not all light and love history and good stuff, that it is pretty easy to maybe peg that down for some of the activity we're going to be talking about, right? And you can address that, but where are we speaking about, Sean?
So this is a family plot of land that my wife inherited in Tupelo, Mississippi. And this land has been in her family long enough to where they don't pay any tax on it at all. It was granted to the family. It's been in the family, I think, since the 1880s. And generation after generation has moved out there and left. And at one time it was an actual milk producing cow farm. And then it went into disarray for about 40 years, and then we moved on to the property. And just craziness started to happen. We moved from a city in Florida. I'm not used to really being too far out into the woods, but little tiny things started happening that kept growing. One of the first things that happened was we were told stories from her grandfather that the Battle of Tupelo was fought on this property. Not only was it fought there, but there was a witness tree on the property that he claims, and I don't know this to be fact, that one of the last true chiefs of the Chickasaw tribe was actually made chief under this tree, and they referred to this tree as a witness tree. Now, this tree is wider than two F-250s. It is so wide. It's probably like a 300 or 400-year-old tree is what it looks like. I'm sure I'm misjudging the age on it, but when you look at this thing, it's actually got a face on it. Like it looks almost like a human face. It's really strange. And of course, at night, lights can play tricks on you, but it's hard to describe. Out in the distance during the winter when we first moved in a couple years back, there were fires lit, and we couldn't tell where they were coming from, Shannon.
Now, that's actually pretty cool,
just
Sean, just really quickly, because when I went out years and years ago to the Brown property, which they have Sasquatch activity, which kind of, that's kind of cool considering what we're going to be talking about later. John Brown would mention off in the distance on these hills where he, for the most part, he knew really no one should be camping, no one even owned that land, that he would just see random fires, what would look like a fire being lit, and it would go out, and then another one would pop up, some distance away, and it would come in, I think, he would see them like every night for a week or something, and then they'd be gone for months or however long, and then it would start up again.
And that's exactly what would happen here. And it was probably about 20 yards away, far enough to where you could still, it looked like an actual flame flickering.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it would sit there for about 15, 20 minutes. I'd sit on the front porch and smoke a cigarette and just dead eye it, and it wouldn't go away. And you'd walk back out an hour or two later and it would be gone.
I mean, only 20 yards away. That's close. You could actually see the flame.
Yeah, you could see it flicker. It was that close to the house.
Did it kind of, considering the history, did you feel like you should just kind of leave it alone? Like you never had the urge to walk over to one of these quote unquote fires?
Oh, no, I did. And the funny thing is the second you get close enough, it would be so pitch black because of the tree coverage out there. This property was 180 acres. And a lot of it were pines that were meant to be farmed that were never farmed. So they're about 40, 50 feet up in the air. And these fires would take place in between these trees. And by the time you got there, it was so dark out, it looked like it just vanished.
So you would start to move towards it and poof, it's gone.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Well, that's quite interactive, I must say.
Yeah, it gets worse. We had quite a few other things happen on the property. One of the weirdest things, and this is going to sound really strange, but the face on that witness tree, it would change. I don't know if it was the weather, and I'm very skeptical, but I tend to keep an open mind. But it was super, super strange. Like the face over the course of a couple months, it looked like it would have a grin or a frown, or I don't know if I was reading too much into it, if it was pareidolia, but it is a really big, strange tree. And I can tell you that the property was, so many people were into it that we would have amateur archaeologists that would come out. And they would search for musket balls and pottery. And there, apparently at one time in the mid 1800s, there was an actual a tavern built on this property. And they actually recovered some British pottery. You know, the old school fancy stuff that is literally, it's like an indigo blue and white. That you would find on old, really nice pottery. Mm-hmm. They found that. They found musket balls. They found 2 dueling pistols.
Oh, okay, that is pretty damn cool.
I thought it was awesome. Here's the sad thing, though. They found them. They put them in one of the safes and one of the wood sheds on property. And so, funny enough, this property is so huge. And they used to be so big into woodworking that there are literally 4 wood sheds. And when I say sheds, it's basically built up concrete garage structures they're not metal. They were all handmade, almost like a house. And those dueling pistols were put into a safe, and no one has been able to open that safe since.
No kidding. So the key's lost? Like you just, what's the story there?
We don't know. And we've literally been trying to find a way to open up the safe her father has for probably about a decade. just because they were very ornate dueling pistols. Apparently they were, for hard to describe, like a gentleman's duel, probably.
Mm-hmm. Like the smaller size pistols.
Yeah, not big at all. It'd be
Right.
something that you would see today. If you were to buy one, it would probably come in a case that was lined in crushed velvet.
Right. Well, I guess at least they're safe in there. If you have the safe, then they haven't gone anywhere, presumably, unless something really strange has happened. But so who actually has that safe?
So it's the grandfather, my wife's grandfather, basically has the safe, and it's not a huge one, but it's something that it probably weighs 600-700 pounds. Can't really transport it.
Oh, gosh. That's larger than I was thinking. Yeah, boy, if those pistols could talk, right? The stories that they could tell.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. One other thing that happens on the property, and this is a little bit more into, I would think, your side. It's a little bit more on the cryptid. We have big black cats out there. And the Department of Forestry in Mississippi claims they do not exist.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how I came about this assumption. Now, we have foxes out there. I know what foxes sound like. I know their screams can be terrifying to some people. I was out front one night, and we had just come back from going to dinner. It wasn't too late. It was probably about 9:30, 10 o'clock. And there's no lighting out there. We had one light to light up probably the front 5 acres in front of the house. We have a freestanding garage that's off to the right, probably about 10 yards out from the front door. And behind it, you could hear the scream, and it literally sounded like a woman being murdered. And it was really strange. It happened 2-3 more times. And on this property, to note, behind the house, probably 60 yards behind the house, is the front lip of a 175-yard across lake that is massive. And there are game trails all over it where animals come and drink and whatnot. And so I followed this scream like an idiot. I was armed, but I follow it out back. Of course, I lose sight of anything that would have possibly been out there. It was raining a little bit, so you couldn't really catch up with tracks. But the following morning, I go back out there, and there is multiple piles of scat around the lake, and there's fur in the scat. So that means we've got a predator. Put up trail cams, and darn sure enough, there are black cats on that property.
How big you think they are? Or the one that you captured on trail cam?
This one, I think, is probably 90 to 110 pounds. Mm. It's pretty big. It's a lot of the family members were telling me, oh, it's got to be a bobcat, it's got to be this. And then I show them the trail cam footage, and they couldn't believe it. I actually went to the one of the local wildlife guys that my wife's father is friends with, and he couldn't believe it either. And he basically told us that he believes that they were just migrating.
Mm.
But it would only happen in the winter months. So I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I imagine that lake just provides all kinds of, what everything needs to survive. Everything will come in, and then predators can come in and hunt there, and it's a perfect place to get food and drink.
Well, we were really lucky for having lived on this property because the lake behind the house, it actually has largemouth bass in it. At one time, there were beavers. It's hard to describe how grandiose and how big this lake is to you. It's massive. In order to see the whole thing, it's literally a 45-minute four-wheeler ride around it.
Okay, that is massive.
Yeah, it's huge. So those are a few things that have happened out on that property. Is there anything else that you can think of that I've noted that you would like to speak on that property? Because there's so much.
Yeah, and actually, I was wondering if you meant one and the same, or if this is something different. Because, you brought up the fact that you confirmed there was a big black cat, and cats are known to yell and scream and make weird noises. You mentioned the screaming lady. Is that something separate, or is that like a nickname that you gave the cat or something that you think it's actually
That's what I gave the cat.
Okay,
basically.
gotcha. Yeah. Because that's something that throws a lot of people off or terrifies people when they're out in the bush, is they're like, oh my God, there's a woman being murdered, they're screaming, and you're going, well, it may be a cat.
And it's the strangest thing. I've never heard anything like that. And I've spent time around panthers in Florida, bobcats. I have a buddy that actually has a lynx as a pet, funny enough. And never heard anything like that. I've done a little bit of research into it. The closest thing I can think of it would be like a mountain lion, but that dark coloring on it, they claim that's super rare
For a mountain lion to be that dark or nearly black.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Oh, that's pretty cool. Do you still have the screenshot of that trail cam?
I do. I need to send it to you, and I've got some other photos. I only sent you one as a teaser, but I have more that I need to send you.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
And in fact, let's see if I can do that now. Try to send it over to you. But
yeah, and actually, Sean, because we're talking about things like, I mean, for lack of a better terms, when you call maybe a spook light, these fires that are being lit and then they go out and they pop up in another place. So essentially spook lights in the classic sense. Do you know more about, maybe just a generalization about the Battle of Tupelo? Like how many people, what was the deal with that? How long was it fought? Do you know any of the stuff on that, even in general?
In general, not as much as what I would like to. I spend a whole lot of time at work these days, and just moving into this new house, we haven't had a whole lot of time to just do ourselves. But in the general idea that I know of, and I've been to, there's an actual museum for the Battle of Tupelo, funny enough, that is not even a mile away from our house. So, meaning the property that we just moved off of.
Right.
I do believe it was actually a pretty significant battle. And I know that it had to do with the volunteers coming out of Tennessee on the southern end. And apparently they had significant casualties. Apparently the North took out quite a few. But the story is from the grandfather that they spent a lot of time resting on our property, and that it came to a head, and that the South basically, when they went to flee, our property is where they went to.
Mm. Yeah, you got to imagine a lot of just heavy hearts and stress and everything just soaking into that land there.
It is significant enough to where the family calls the land the Chief's Lodge.
Wow.
So,
wow.
And it's pretty crazy.
I mean, for all that energy to be there, and then, you've got things like these spook lights and random fires popping up and things, and that weird face in the tree. That's extremely interesting because trees generally, they grow pretty darn slow. So it's kind of interesting that you noticed enough that it looks like it's smiling, then grimacing, and that's kind of cool. One more thing that before we move into the stuff that you just mentioned to me, before we began, is you mentioned a shadow person or people in the home.
Yeah. It's something I tried not to acknowledge while we were there. through my research and everything that I've read, and like I told you in the past, I've tried to research into this field for probably almost 20 years. And everything that I've basically read is if you give it credence, you give it power. So I tried to ignore it, like not even acknowledge it, not even notice anything, just go on with my business. And it tended to be in the hallway on this property, and it wouldn't be a full figure. I would get usually from like the upper torso, but there was a couple times that I would be in the living room, and our hallway would be off to the right, and this hallway had 3 adjoining rooms connected to it from the living room just off to the right, and if you were to go straight ahead would be the opened up kitchen. And I would just be sitting in the living room, and you would see something peek its head out, and it would always be like in the corner of your eye, but it would be enough to where you could see movement. And that's one of the few things that kind of unnerved me on the property. It would be bad enough I would be on my phone watching a YouTube video, and I'd put it up in front of the hallway so I wouldn't have to look down the hallway.
That's how often you would see this thing. Wow, that's crazy. Sorry, no, go ahead, Sean.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I would say there wouldn't be too much interaction besides that, but it was freaky enough, Shannon, especially hearing your story on Shadow People, to where I couldn't look down that hallway. And the sad thing is that we would put night lights down the hallway, just see if that would if it would help at all. Every time we would put one in, the bulbs would go out.
How long would they last?
Sometimes a day or two. And this is where it got even weirder. After there was a time to where we put a bulb in every couple hours. The electrical panel went out in that hallway. Call an electrician to come back out and fix it. It maybe lasted a week. It was super strange, and it was just in the hallway.
And your wife saw this thing as well.
She did. In fact, she considers herself to be an empath, because her and her father both actually have problems with sleep paralysis, but she tends to think it's a little more on the opposite side of actual paralysis.
So if she's an empath, I can't imagine it was very easy for her to live there. How long were you guys there for?
About 2 years, but it's not as bad as the last house we lived in Florida.
Well, we can definitely dive into that afterward, huh? If you're up for that. Okay, yeah.
Oh, that's fine.
So did she ever get any feelings about, well, let's just focus on this shadow person. Did she get any feelings about who or what that was?
She is the type of person that literally, and I am too, we tend to put our nose to the grindstone, and no matter what happens, we don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife is the type of person to where these things would happen so often that she just gave up and just let them happen. Wouldn't acknowledge it, wouldn't try to pay attention to it. If something really freaky happened, she would tell me. But most of the time, she wouldn't even tell me if anything was going on.
So she just keeps on trucking. So she's a brave, strong lady right there. She just keeps on going.
Strongest lady I've ever met, so...
So this house, you said, is obviously quite old. And my question about the shadow person is, was it always peeking around the same corner each and every time, or did you see it in other parts of the hallway or around another corner?
It was mostly in one same spot. And what makes me think about that is it almost makes me feel like it's a residual type haunt.
Yes,
if
exactly.
it's actually a haunt.
Right.
I mean, you can't really quantify these things.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. And I was wondering if you guys were seeing it in other spots or not. I mean, the peaking, of course, seems very interactive, but that could still be a residual thing, and you just happen to see it peeking around the corner, right? So you're like, oh my God, it's watching me. But it may do that when you're not even there.
That's the thing. It was really weird. To me, I would only notice it on certain days of the week.
What days?
Like usually, this is going to sound funny, and this does not involve any form of inebriation whatsoever. I would usually see it in the early afternoons on the weekends, which is weird. There's more light out. I'd see it at like 1 or 2 in the afternoon.
Now streaming on Peacock.
Deep in the woods stands a lone door.
What's behind the door? Nightmares. Your worst nightmares.
Time to fight your demons.
Who are you?
I'm a weapon.
This girl is a cold soul killer.
I'm gonna end this thing.
Are you like the Terminator?
The Girl in the Woods. A brand new series streaming now only on Peacock.
That is so interesting. Yeah, because then that even lends probably more to it being residual, right? Like, I don't know. That is, the shadow person thing is obviously near and dear to my heart. So I like getting all the details that I can about that. Was there anything strange about, well, not that it's not strange in and of itself, but as far as the shape, like I just had a talk with John R. Myers for my Patreons, and he saw a shadow person that had this elongated neck, which is pretty freaky. Did it have any weird proportions to it? The part that you saw?
It did. It almost had, the curve of the head was different. And it literally, it's hard to describe. It almost looks static-like.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was there, but it wasn't, but it was almost like it was pixelated. And the back of the head would curve, not to a point, but almost to almost like a melon shape, but much shorter, just a little more rounded.
Yeah, that would freak me out too. I'd have done the same thing. I'd have been like, let me get my phone or iPad and just block that part of the hallway because you don't need to see that, you know?
That's literally what I would do. I would turn on the TV, turn the subwoofer up, and put the cell phone up to my face so I didn't have to see it.
I don't blame you, man. That's totally different seeing one in your house. No, thanks, no. Well, yeah, would you mind covering a little bit about this Florida house?
This is where you'll find this one to be super interesting. So, moving to a place out towards the beach in the area that we wanted to move to. And it's super expensive out there the closer you get to the beach. This is in northern Florida. Ends up being a 2-bedroom, 2.5-bath townhouse. Really good square footage. I think it was like 2,400 square feet. We liked this place enough. We kept it for about 7 years, and we were renting. And when we moved in the first day, and this is something that I made sure that we left after we moved out of this location, we walk into the kitchen, and there's a really weird music box. And there's a couple little trinkets sitting on the counter in the kitchen. And it played this really weird song. It almost sounded like it was Oriental, like something you would find over in Asia. And it wasn't anything that you opened up and looked at. It's hard to describe. It was like purple and white in the shape of a mountain. And I think it said something on it like, "Let's be friends." Something really creepy. So we found these weird trinkets sitting in the corner of this new house that we moved into. And of course, we left them there for the whole 7 years. the kitchen was so big, they were ornate, so we left it in the corner. But this is the first time that my wife told me that she had a lady sitting on top of her screaming at her. And of course, I'm not an empath. I've had quite a few weird things happen, but I'm not a true believer in a lot of it. But my wife kept telling me that she had problems sleeping. And I had to be up for work at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So what we would do is, depending on what days I worked and what days she worked in our schedule, she would sleep in one room and I would sleep in the other because we had completely opposite schedules. Well, I would sleep in the master, she would sleep in the guest. And the guest bedroom still is quite large. But she kept telling me that I keep having this woman scream at me. I said, okay. So we had a friend come over and we smoldered the house. We got some sage, see what we could do. We had a friend come over that tried to basically bless the house and whatnot. And I'm sure it was half-cocked, knowing what was going on at the time. We were young. We didn't know what we were doing. But it kept happening night after night. And eventually it got to be bad enough to where my wife couldn't sleep there anymore. She had to go sleep at her parents' house, which was about a 45-minute drive away. And of course, I didn't believe her at all, Shannon. Until one night, I'm going to sleep, and I'm not joking. And this is the strangest, this is the only thing that's really ever super scared me. On the right corner of the bed, I could literally feel someone's buttocks firmly press on the bed and sit. Like physically move the bed. Like if you were to sit right next to me and we're sitting down, or like I'm laying down on a mattress and you could physically feel it. That got to be so often that it was at least 2 or 3 nights out of the week. And they would always sit in the same spot and they would always face with their back towards me, basically looking out a window.
Did you ever say anything when it happened? Like try to talk to it?
I made the mistake of getting a little inebriated one night, and my wife told me that she thinks it resided in the closet in the guest room. So I went up there and tried to talk to it, put the phone out. I had a digital recorder, tried to see if I could get any EVPs or anything off of it. Really didn't get anything. But the funny thing is the longer we were there, the better it would treat us. So like, it's hard to describe, but eventually I got to the point to where when I would feel it sit down on the bed, I would kick with my leg exactly where it would be sitting and yell at it and tell it basically, I got to be up in the morning. You got to leave me alone. And slowly but surely, it didn't really go away, but it seemed to be more friendly.
But your wife, or maybe she didn't know, did she feel like the thing sitting on your bed and then this lady sitting on her and screaming at her was in fact one and the same?
I don't think so. Because I think it almost felt like I was being looked after. But I mean, it still creeped me out.
Mm-hmm.
But my wife was terrified of it. I still can't believe we stayed there as long as we did. It freaked her out that much.
Yeah, that she's driving 45 minutes to her parents just to sleep. That's a lot.
Yeah. And the drive to work from her parents' house was almost an hour and 15 minutes, and she would almost do that on the daily.
So which one of these
And
things lived in the guest room closet? Her screaming one or the sitting one?
From what we can figure, we think it was funny enough, the screaming lady again. But yeah, that's what we think it was. It was the one that was more angry towards my wife, I guess.
It's always a basement, a closet, a hallway. Hallways are very infamous for having activity. I guess, people walk down hallways an awful lot. The closet thing is kind of different, though. People don't normally leave a whole lot of their energy in the closet. Their clothes are in there. Maybe that is what gives off the energy. Yeah. But your wife, when she says empath, because there's so many different levels, and some people can see things, other people can feel things. Did she see these things at all, or was it more just a feeling, like a knowing?
She claims that she can only see, she can't feel.
Oh gosh. So she could see these. I see that. I don't know. I think to me, that would be pretty hard to take. What did the screaming lady look like then?
So she believed that it was a woman in her mid-20s with shoulder-length brown hair. She claims that the eyes were super dark and that she was wearing a white, I don't know if you would call it, not a nightie, but white bedwear, almost like a dress, but with long sleeves, like something that you would basically wear to bed,
but
like
kind
an
of
older housewife.
Okay, so maybe like old timey, because if she's in her 20s, that's kind of weird for someone in their 20s to. Well, not weird, but you know what I mean. It's just not maybe the norm for someone in their 20s to wear. So maybe just old timey clothes.
Well, the property was only built in the 80s, so it really wasn't that old.
Unless
so there's no telling when.
Unless it's attached to that damn music box with the "Let's Be Friends" creepy writing on it and the trinkets or something.
We left that, and one thing that I just saw last week that I was kind of upset about, in the guest bedroom in the new house, the wife brought one of the trinkets.
Oh.
Yeah, but the music box, I made sure we left that thing. It was creepy.
So you're not too happy that one of the trinkets found its way along with you guys?
And the weird thing is, it was hung, I don't know if the wife had to do it, but she hung it in a really weird location in one of the guest bedrooms that we're basically using as storage right now.
Well, with her being an empath, maybe, err on the side of trusting her probably to make the right decision. Maybe that in turn is keeping something away from you guys in a way, or appeasing something. I'm sure she wouldn't drag that along if it was going to bring the screaming lady or the sitter to where it keeps you guys up. I'm sure she didn't enjoy that whole experience very much.
Yeah, I trust this woman. She's never really steered me wrong. So pretty much anything that she says is the word.
Right. So. Good man. You already know, huh? No, that
I was, as she would say, I am trained very well.
You are house trained. See, you're good.
Yes,
Sean.
I'm
You're
housebroken.
Yeah. You're like, I'm good. I know what I need to do. I know my place. That's a good man right there. Yeah, I can understand that though. When you have items that are attached to, not some really great memories, you kind of go, oh God, why is this here? What in the actual heck? I mean, have you straight out asked her why she brought it? Why it's there? Why it's hanging where it is?
I have not, because I do not want to stir the pot. But we haven't had anything happen on this property inside the house, at least.
Okay.
So.
Right. We're going to get there. Yay. Okay. Well, anything else at the Florida house you want to share?
It was just a really weird location. You felt something when you walked in the house. And I don't know if it was just the years that I spent there, but it was just it's hard to describe. It feels like a weight almost when you would walk in that house. Just like somebody threw a couple pounds on your shoulders. It was really strange, and I don't usually feel anything like that.
Yeah, so if you're feeling that, I can only imagine what your wife was going through. If she's empathic and can actually see things, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, how long was she driving to the parents' house to sleep? I mean, you guys were there for 7 years. How long was that going on?
Well, it didn't really start happening till probably about 5 years in. And like little tiny weird things would happen. But she did it for probably about a good 11, 12 months.
Jeez.
Yeah, the gas bills weren't fun, especially in Florida.
Yeah, there's some really crappy traffic in some parts of Florida. And you add the rain, the torrential downpours in, and it's a long drive. I mean, that had to have...
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Just to give a hint, this is one of the largest landmass cities in the United States that we moved out of.
Mm-hmm.
It's 45 minutes out to the beach from one side of town. It's bad.
I mean, that had to wear on her for driving that long just to sleep in peace without this kind of a-hole screaming at her, you know?
She would come home crying. She would come home, get clothes. Every once in a while, like, we'd sit down and cook dinner, and I couldn't leave because of what I did for a living. I was a law enforcement officer, and my shifts that I had were they were all over the place. I was what you would call a floater. So I would take all the shifts. If somebody called out, I'd be forced to take theirs or do it overnight, or it was pretty difficult. We've been together since she was 19, I was 23, and I'm getting to be an old man now. So it's been, I think, 17 years. So she is my world. So.
Well, where do you want to go next, Sean? You want to go to the UFO sightings? You want to go to the grimoire? Where do you want to go?
I want to go to the grimoire.
Let's do it.
This is something that I've never been able to tell anybody and them not look at me and tell me that I'm nuts. So in my early 20s and growing up as a child, my mother was always very spiritual. I grew up in a strict Catholic household, but my mother always she was into ghosts, to be honest with you. She was the type that would actually go not just on haunted tours before K2 meters or anything else showed up. She would be one of the ones that would actually try to go investigate and do whatever she could. She was always a big believer in the afterlife. And so it pretty much fueled me as a young man in my 20s to go out and research. And I was lucky enough to work with a gentleman for about 4 years who was so deep into research, and I wouldn't say practicing the occult, but researching the occult, that every day he would bring me either a new book or a magazine, or he's the gentleman that basically introduced me to Coast, that started piquing my interest. I'd say probably about a year into working with him on lunch break or smoke break or whatever we had, he would bring me literature. And one day he brings me, I would call a grimoire. It had all Roman numerals on the front, and we're not talking little Roman numerals. I wish I knew what the book is. I could probably call them and find out right now. But it had probably about 12 Roman numerals on the front of it, and it was bound in red leather. We're talking 700-800 pages, Shannon. Super dense. And I'm flipping around. I don't know what I'm reading. And then I start to get into the index, and I start seeing, all right, there's an invocation to Gabriel. There's an invocation to this and that. And when you start further reading into the book, it does have invocations, but what it does is it abbreviates them so it's not the actual full invocation for a true believer that would actually try to invoke anything, to where you would read it and it, it may or may not happen. I can't remember the exact invocation that I was reading, and I did not read this aloud. And it claimed it was only a partial. It said, basically, if you want to finish this, turn to this page. And it was very well organized. So I read this. It was a Friday. This is before I met my wife. I think I was 21 or 22. So I read this, and normal day, nothing big. Finish up work, get home probably about 5:30, 6 o'clock. I'm going to make some dinner. None of my roommates are home. We were living in this big 4-bedroom, 3-bath on a really bad side of town because of, at that age, you're broke. And I'm opening the refrigerator, and I hear this scream. And this is probably the most scary event I've ever had happen in my life. And I've had guns put to my head. I've had knives put to my throat. I've had all kinds of physical things happen, and I'm not a small man. And the scream comes from out of nowhere, and it freaks me out enough to where I shut the refrigerator, and I'm thinking to myself, all right, I'm going to get changed. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go to a buddy's house just to be able to get out of the house. The second I grabbed my doorknob, and this room that we had, it was painted green. We used to refer to it as the green room. And depending on who was living in the house, depended on, like, if you had a girlfriend living with you, you got the master, and we would switch rooms every once in a while. But I went to go grab this doorknob, and the second that I grab it, it goes stiff. It won't turn. And after trying to get it to turn just a little bit, I push it in, and the door pushes back on me. And I just freak out and I leave the house. It's still, I can remember every second of it in my mind, exactly how it happened. I can tell you exactly what I was going to make for dinner. It's impressed into my brain far enough to where it gives me shivers just thinking about it. After that, I went and I talked to my coworker about it, and he actually believed me.
Now, do you remember what you were reading in the grimoire at the time?
So there were a couple different invocations I was looking through, and this is what baffles me, is that one of the invocations that I truly remember reading was supposed to be an invocation to the Archangel Gabriel, funny enough, which makes no sense to me.
There's a photo that I will send you. It's one that I took of me holding a book because I was talking with John Paul Capice at one time about these very things. And on Amazon, you can buy these grimoires. And I got the 3 magical books of Solomon. It includes the Testament of Solomon and his greater and lesser keys. And that's all in one book. But the cover of it has got, this round symbol and kind of this pentagram looking thing and some Roman numerals. So I will send you that once we're off of the call here. And I want to see if that's possibly the one that you were also reading. I mean, there are several, or maybe way more than several, available on just even Amazon. I mean, obviously yours was like leather bound. It was like a serious one, but there's all various copies of these things to where the invocation thing, like kind of yikes, And so even though that was abbreviated, seemingly something came to say hello to you.
And like I said, it was probably the scariest thing I think I've ever had happen. And I'm a skeptic, but I've seen so much to where it makes me like almost a believer, like a little bit more than probably a believer. Like it continued the research on another decade.
Now, what about when you returned home? Was there anything going on after that, or was that it?
That was it. Nothing else happened in that house. I think I moved out probably about 6-7 months later, and that was it. It was done.
Did you keep reading from the grimoire at all?
No, that was abruptly returned.
Good man. Very good choice. What did your friend say? The one that gave you the book, when you told him what had gone down?
He refused to give me literature after that. Not necessarily refused, probably on the lighter note.
Right.
Would give me, I think, do you remember Fate magazine?
Yes, of course.
He would start bringing me copies of Fate magazine and a couple other things here and there.
Right.
Nothing as hardcore as what it was before.
Maybe you are a little bit more powerful or empathic than you think. Then, if you can just read from the grimoire and maybe manifest something. I mean, I don't know how else to quantify that, but I suppose it's no different than opening the door by using a Ouija board, right?
And which I refuse to touch, but I have had readings done and tarot readings, and I've had 3 that have told me that they think that I'm an emotional empath. That I can basically feel the tension in the room before it happens, and I'm almost a believer to it. Because when people get angry or whatnot around me, it deeply bothers me.
Sean, what did that scream sound like when you opened the fridge? Which reminds me of Ghostbusters big time, by the way. I mean, that was a growl, but, same thing. It just popped in my head.
It was closer to, yeah, sorry about that. It was closer to a growl.
Oh, it was? Oh,
but
how nice.
But here's the weird thing. The way that it sounded, it didn't sound like it came from one location in the hallway. It sounded like something screaming, moving in a circular motion. That was the weirdest thing for me. If it was some random scream, we didn't have any animals at the time. If it was a random scream, like I think I would have acknowledged it and been like, oh, okay, not a big deal. But this was enough to freak me out. And at the time, I was working a job. Even though I was young, I still had to wear a suit into work. And of course, you want to take that thing off. I left the house in the suit.
Well, at least you could get out of the darn house after it's trying to keep you in there. No thanks. I don't blame you. Here, take your book back. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. But I find it strange that I've had so many off-the-wall things happen, and they all fall into so many different categories.
That's all right. That happens.
Yeah, but researchers such as yourself and even Ryan Sprague, we search for things like this, and, it doesn't happen. How am I weird enough to have so many things hit so many different categories?
Well, I think that one of the things that you brought up, and this doesn't answer anything because I don't have any answers, but, you mentioned that your mother was very spiritual, into ghost hunting, and, I bet grandmas and maybe grandpas or whoever, a lot of times this stuff follows a bloodline, and I'll bet that it's kind of one of those things where even the emotional empath or any kind of empathy on the spiritual side would follow that same bloodline. So, some people just seem to be kind of if I can speak, magnetic for these things, and things are just drawn to them.
And that brings us on to other stories too.
Yes, please.
We could almost do a part 2 on this with what happened with Grandma. So I didn't even touch on that topic. And she just recently passed, and we had a couple strange things happen with that too, funny enough.
With your grandma?
Yeah. Just to go off on a side note, the day and hour that she died, we took her out of hospice due to COVID. We wanted to be around her. And it was a really hard time. My parents rebuilt a quarter of their house just for Grandma because we thought she was going to make it. Did a handy, capable bathroom, all that good stuff. And her nurse that would pretty much be there most of the day, my mom comes home and she basically tells me, she's like, my dad. She's like, he just walked in the door and went down the hallway. And Dad wasn't home. And it was literally the minute that Grandma passed. And she was like, he had a smaller gentleman with him. And we think that was a close friend. My mom thinks that was Grandpa coming to get her.
Oh. He was a smaller... So which one was...
No. So the Grandpa was 6'4". That's how big my dad is.
Oh.
And one of his best friends was a short guy that was only probably about 5'3".
Oh. And that was in fact the exact same time that she passed.
It was probably a minute or two. She passed right before my mom got home. My mom got home minutes after. The healthcare worker tells my mom this, that she's like, 2 guys just walked down the hallway, one really tall, one really short. And then 5 minutes later, my dad pulls into the driveway.
Oh, wow.
And it kind of chokes me up.
I do love stories like that, but it's so jarring to hear, right? Because, I mean, dying is something that we're all going to have to face one of these days. And, I think a lot of us are kind of scared about it and, of course, wondering about what that's going to be like. But it is very, very heartening to hear that, well, there must be some continuation of who we are and, a tether to what we were and those that are still here when you hear a story like this.
Well, it everything that I listened to on your program and numerous other programs suggests to me that this is not the end. And I'm afraid for it, but hearing that gives me hope.
Absolutely. Well, that's a cool story.
Yeah, I didn't even mean to bring that one up. It's just, that was something that I didn't even think of, really, to be honest with you, Shannon. I'm sorry, I should have included that.
No, that's how these things go. Once we open up the gates, everything sometimes comes flooding out. And no, I appreciate you sharing that. That's a very cool story.
Yeah, it's just, my mom was freaked out about it, too. She was crying when she told me. And she told me I was pulling into work at about probably 4 o'clock in the morning, and she's texting me all of this. So, of course, I get her on the phone, walk into work. I'm like, listen, I can't be here today. I got to fly to Florida. Sorry. But, yeah, that's, like I said, so many weird things. And the new house, good God. The new house is probably the weirdest.
Well, let's hear it.
So, bought a house in August. Lived in it not even really 2 months. Still haven't even fully unpacked. Not a big believer in cryptids. Big cats, are one thing. And funny enough, this happened right after we had to reschedule one day. And I just basically, I don't have great internet connection where I am now, where I would send more photos to you. And this is the first thing that happened. And it's been about 6 or 7 times. Basically sitting in the front yard, completely dorking out in a bathrobe and pajamas and just being super comfortable, smoking a cigarette, watching YouTube, downloaded more podcasts for the next day for work. And out of nowhere, I get hit in the head and almost square in my forehead with a rock. And this is not an acorn falling from a tree in the middle of the woods. I live probably about 10 miles away from the nearest any type of store. My closest neighbor is probably about a mile and a half away. We did this purposely. We wanted to move in the middle of nowhere. We didn't want to be around anybody. And we moved so far out, it's a 45-minute drive into work for me. I think it's 36 miles if I'm doing 80. So I get hit in the forehead with a rock. And this is something I think you touched upon in one of the shows. The second I get hit in the head with a rock, I go walk off to where the area I think the rock's been thrown from. And I see two lights come up and split. And they were blue. I don't know if you could relate to that any. I think I remember on you saying something about somebody seeing lights separate and move while you had a Squatch encounter.
Yeah, that was, and not to, it's again the Brown property. But we were out there for, of course, Bigfoot, because that's what was going on there. Besides, of course, I brought up the lights earlier, right? So he did actually have other activity, but the main stuff was the Bigfoot. We were out there. It was, I think that was the very first night we were out there, and it started to pour, and we saw one light, and we thought it was just a guy with a headlamp on. It didn't split or anything. I have heard of that, but I've never seen that. But we saw this light or orb. We just thought it was a headlamp, and the second we all started going, hey, who's this out here in the freezing cold rain? It was really late at night, or early in the morning, I should say. And it just dove towards the ground, and it was gone. And we couldn't even get it on the super expensive FLIR thermal. We're like, there's no person there. I don't know what that was, but I have heard of that, where you have supposed what you would, quantify as it's either a person or a Sasquatch, right? That can accurately throw a rock like that. And then you have light activity. So you walked over to where you thought the rock came from. And what time was this, by the way?
So this is probably about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm.
It's pitch black. And just to paint a picture of the property that we just recently bought, the term out here is what they call a holler. And Virginia, West Virginia, other areas they call it. But it's basically a dip in the property. And our house is built up and almost built in. It almost looks like it's built into the side of a hill. And on both sides of our property, it dips down a good distance, maybe 20, 30 feet, but like a gradual incline. On the right side of the property, it dips down very sharp. I would say probably about 15, 20 feet. And if you're walking, you will fall down that. It is dangerous. So I'm walking out of the front door. You take a left out of the property. I get hit in the head, and I walk left, and I'm not a believer in orbs on almost any matter. I think a lot of it is dust particles when you're looking at film. I think it's almost kind of a woo-woo, but that's just my opinion. But this looked like two fireflies split in half, about 3 times the size, in a V-shaped formation, and just went opposite directions and just vanished. And this is probably about 10 to 15 feet in to the holler that's on, if you're looking at the street, it would be on the right side of the property. And this just recently happened. We're talking like not even a week and a half ago.
So what has happened 6 or 7 times? You seen the light, or you getting hit, or both?
Oh, no, neither. This is where it gets a little weird. And I did a little bit of research on this. So 3 or 4 times in the past week and a half, and it's usually like in the middle of the week, probably about 9, 10 o'clock, I'm getting banging on the house, and it sounds like a dog barking. It's really weird. And it, like, not just a dog barking, it sounds like the dog is in my house. Now this is an older house. I haven't completely renovated it yet. It's got pretty thin window panes on it. But when I say barking, it's just like one loud bark. I hear like 1 or 2 little bangs, and the house is all stone. It's not wood. I don't know if they're banging on a tree or something nearby, but we walk outside at least two of the times, and you can hear behind the house, the property, it's a big piece of property, and it goes back down into a dry riverbed. And you can literally hear something walking. And when I say walking, like the stride on it when you hear it walk, and we have a lot of dead leaves out there, the stride on it, it sounds like, it's hard to describe, but you know how if you were to hear a dog run through leaves, you would pretty much be able to tell if it was bipedal or quadrupedal just by the amount of rustling that is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like someone walking. So, of course, we were a little late to it the first two times that we heard it, and every time it sounds like a dog barking. So, of course, me living out in the woods and having this screaming cat in the front yard and everything, I went and I've spent quite a few $100s on spotlights and high-powered LEDs and anything that you could pretty much think of that would be able to cast light as far out as what we would need. So I walk out with the spotlight, and my wife walks out with me. And I think this is right after I get hit in the head with the rock, probably just a few days later. And we don't see anything, but we hear the walking. And it freaks the wife out. She runs inside and grabs a handgun. And I'm like, all right, let's not worry about this. It happens probably 2-3 nights later. The same thing happens. No knocking, just hear a really loud dog bark. And we've got the windows open, and we could hear, it sounded like somebody walking. So we both go outside, and after going outside, we actually spot something this time. But the only thing that we see is we see one arm, like if you were to put your arm back behind your shoulder and run it forward, like almost like a running motion, if you were to reach back behind you and just shift your shoulder forward.
Mm-hmm.
We see one arm, and then it's gone. And that's it. But the following day is when my wife is like, oh, did I not show you this photo that I just took? And this is one of the ones I've sent you. I've got whenever I get to the house and get on Wi-Fi, I'll send you the rest of them. But my wife is like, yeah, I took this photo. It looks like a gorilla handprint. It's kind of weird. And my wife is not a believer in any of this. I'm like, you got to be joking me. Show me this. And she just nonchalantly, just like, by the way, shows me this photo. And we walk outside, and the prints are still there. I wish she would have told me when she saw it. But it literally, and I don't know if this is woo-woo or not, but it looks like something took both hands, and this is on a piece of cardboard that my wife was spray painting various objects to put into the house. You know, she's interior decorating right now at the new place. But it looks like you were to take your knuckles, like your front knuckles, and put them down like you were a center in the NFL or playing football or whatnot, and you were to get ready for the quarterback to hike. But the way that the knuckles are placed, they're so wide, especially the thumbprint on it is so far out that it looks so strange. And the weirdest thing is with the wife coming up to me and basically saying, it looks like we have a gorilla print. And I've actually got photos close enough to where it looks like you can almost make out, I wouldn't necessarily say fingerprints, I would say tissue impressions maybe. Like I took a really high-powered camera to it and zoomed in on it. But Shannon, this is so weird. I've never had anything like this.
Yeah, I've got the photo pulled up, and it does look like it took off like maybe a bunch of dust or something off of the inside of this cardboard that she was using. And it is because as you were saying that, I was actually placing my hand down, as you said, the knuckles and then the thumb out, and that's exactly because the thumb's in a weird spot. But when you do it
It's
on
really
a desk,
weird.
it actually that is close to what it would be. It sticks way out, but. I mean, there's no, the only thing that's unfortunate is, of course, there's no scale for this, but, well, no, that's not really true because there's a handle where a human hand would go through that handle, right? So it's a little bit of a scale, but it does look like they're quite far apart. I mean, our knuckles are basically right next to each other. These are not at all close to one another.
They're not. And funny enough, one of the photos for scale, I put a dollar bill down.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, I did it so quick because I think it was starting to rain that just for scale, I went and I took just a $1 bill and put it down behind it so it wouldn't get anywhere near it. But those prints stayed for days, and I think I took about 7 or 8 photos of it. I just gave you the first one literally 5 minutes after she had told me, "Oh, by the way, look what I found."
Yeah, I remember getting that, and you're like, maybe it's got, like, we're kind of thinking, like, maybe it's a good thing that the connection wasn't so good last time because we have other things to talk about now. Look at this. So,
well,
no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, it gets crazier. And not necessarily in that way on the property, but what were you looking at?
Well, because I was just going to ask about the arm that you actually saw. Like, how big was that thing?
It looked bigger than what it should be. Like, it was disproportioned almost. Like, it was literally longer than, let's say, what do they claim? That your arm length is usually about, what, half your body length? Not even?
Yeah, I think I've heard something like that. Mm-hmm.
It looked like it was probably about a good foot, maybe 1.5 feet longer than what it needed to be. And yet again, it was dark. I couldn't necessarily make out fur or anything.
Okay.
But, or hair, but it was long enough to where it looked completely disproportioned. And, I'm actually going to go to, we still haven't even met any of the neighbors yet. That's how fresh we are on this property. So I plan on going to one of the neighbors that I haven't met yet and asking questions because we are hearing long howls. We don't hear wood knocks or anything, but we're hearing long howls, like really long, like let's say like 25, 30 seconds.
Like the Ohio howl kind of a thing? Because that one is a long peal.
I wouldn't necessarily say as long as the Ohio howl. That thing is noteworthy.
Yeah, it is. But close. I mean, close enough to where that you can identify with that.
Close enough.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be good to get in with the neighbors and at least go fishing and see what you drag up.
And another thing to add credence to it is, yet again, we moved on to a lake. So our creek bed that we have is basically overflow from the lake that's behind us, and we moved on to a massive lake. This thing is so big it's dammed.
Oh, God.
And there's not a whole lot. Yeah, it's huge.
Okay. Wow. What about, have you had time possibly to look at just straight up reports that are documented online in the area?
I need to go onto the BFRO and figure out if there's anything that's been reported in the area. I really haven't had the time. Like I said, with the last job, still basically doing the same thing now, just for a different department. In other words, my schedule is still all over the place. I really need to look into that. If I see anything in the surrounding area, I'll make sure I definitely send you an email.
Well, yeah, and if you want, of course, this will stay just between us. You can send me a more, localized where you're at, and I can help do the search as well. Because that's pretty interesting with the banging on the house and then the dog barking. Is it always just the one loud bark?
It's weird. Sometimes it's multiple. Sometimes it's one. And it sounds like, it's weird. I did a little bit of research into it, and I've heard that there are claims that sometimes they will mimic a dog.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of piqued my interest to where I was like, when I heard it the first time, I'd already known that sometimes they could possibly mimic a dog, but just hearing it, that was just wild.
Well, and the howls, are they more like, oh, or is it like more of a scream kind of a thing?
No, it's more like a ooh, but it's a higher pitch, and it's further out. Like it sounds like it's probably a quarter mile, half mile. Shoot, it could even be a mile away. But when it happens, you can hear the dogs. So I've got the closest neighbor, even though they're far away, you can hear their dogs howl at the same time, and it is not coyotes, and it's not another dog howling. But when it happens, the dogs around the area, they go nuts.
I wish I was closer. I would come out there and see what's
You're invited anytime.
that would be amazing, because I know of kind of sort of where you are, obviously. And I mean, I've definitely heard some extremely interesting stories out of that area. Not maybe specifically yours to where you might get that excited about it, but I'm just saying in general, the state. So until I know, pinpoint area, but I would love to help do that if you'd like, because it definitely sounds like maybe there is something kind of going down over there. But of course, by the way, I have to touch on a little bit more the accuracy of conking you in the nog right in the middle of your forehead is really impressive.
No, and I thought it was an acorn, and I looked down, and it looked like it was a piece of gravel, about, I would say, about a quarter inch in diameter, and it literally square in the forehead. It was the weirdest thing. And I was looking down, once again, I hate to say it, I'm a YouTube addict. And funny enough, I think I was watching something from Seth Breedlove on the phone. And I think it was one of the new trailers that he's got out for one of the On the Trail Loves. And literally that's when it happened.
Well, that's good timing.
I swear to you, Shannon, I've never had anything like this happen. I've had a couple weird things, and you've heard most of them that have happened my whole entire life. A lot of them aren't that strange. This is the weirdest thing that ever happened.
I'd be putting that little pebble or a piece of gravel in a little mini jar with a label that says when Bigfoot conked me right in the middle of my forehead or right in the middle of my nog.
I wish I would have thought to do that, because literally the wife would have probably put it in a shadow box.
Right.
So.
Now, did you tell your wife about that incident and then the lights splitting and all that?
I walked straight in right after it happened, like literally like 30 seconds after. And the wife looks at me and she's like, uh-huh.
She's not surprised.
But I told you that she's a very strong woman, and she doesn't let anything.
Right.
Yeah. So basically she looks at me and she's like, uh-huh. But then after all these things continued happening, she was the one that came to me. I hadn't heard the howls outside until probably about a week ago. And she's the one that came up to me and went, "Have you heard the howls?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Come outside right now. Listen." And she's not a believer at all. But we did move out into the middle of nowhere, and from everything that I've researched so far, which is, of course, not as much as you have in this field, I think there's a derivative of something close to a skunk ape, is what a lot of people claim in Mississippi.
Yeah, and they can be real pissy down there, too.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently with getting hit in the forehead with a rock.
Yeah.
And by the way, it didn't hit me that hard. It hit me hard enough for me to notice and be like kind of concerned and get up. But it wasn't like it was actually physically trying to hurt me. If it would, I'm sure it could. But
this is kind of a random question, but I'm just trying to get the whole scene. Were you sitting there watching, Seth's trailer and that with it on speaker to where it was out loud, or was this in earbuds or AirPods or something?
No, it was on speaker, but I don't like to blare it. I don't like my volume too loud on the phone. It was probably about halfway up. And I was literally just sitting there, and that was it. I was leaned over with my head facing down. I kind of slouching.
Oh, you were even slouched over and it still hits you in the forehead?
Yeah.
That lends even more to that.
It was.
That's crazy.
Like I said, it sounds crazy. It sounds nuts. But it was literally, and where a rock wouldn't fall from the top of my house. Like, how would that physically happen?
Well, and if you're slouched over, it's not going to hit you in the middle of your forehead. Hey, you got any open slats under your feet? Maybe that thing was laying right underneath you and throwing it. Can you imagine that? I just freaked myself out with the thought of something laying underneath your porch and watching you. Ugh.
No, our porch is. Remember, our house is built in and almost to like a small little mountain or mound, and my front. Like the whole front area of my house is concrete, and there are steps down from our half circle driveway, which is gravel, and it steps down 3 different tiers. So you actually have to step down in order to get into the front of the house.
So it had a little bit better angle at you then. Well, good. I'm glad there was nothing physically laying underneath you while you were on your porch. Because some of the porches, they have this massive open space if it's kind of built on stilts at all or anything. So, no, that's good.
Yeah.
Concrete. I like that. That's better. But still pretty incredible, the accuracy with which that was thrown. But, of course, you have possible what we might call either crazy person or Bigfoot activity. It's either one or the other. And then you have this light. So, and I've had the very same experience. Because right before I saw my light while Bigfooting, which I do find slightly annoying, I still do, we had the slapping on the buildings next to the one that we were taking shelter in from the rain. I know you've heard me tell that story before, so I won't bore everybody with that one again. But same thing. And, I will never say that I know that was Bigfoot or, anything strange hitting the building. I don't know. I didn't see it. But we were out there for Bigfoot, slapping of the building, and then the light. So, it begs the question, do you think that Bigfoot is tied into paranormal stuff, or do you think that's totally separate?
No, I think that, me personally, I think that there was it's hard to describe, maybe Gigantopithecus or somehow either evolved further down the line, or there's stories of wild men out in Tennessee back in the day. There's so many different things that you can look at, but I do believe there is something out there. I just think they're not that great in number. I think they're super rare, and when you come upon them, they're not something that you really are going to be able to get close to, because maybe they have a lifespan as long as a human. That's why you don't ever see their skeletons anywhere. Maybe they dispose of their dead. There's so much to get into, Shannon. I'm trying to think of the doctor's name. I think his name is Dr. Jeffrey Mildrum. Is that correct?
Yes.
He is probably one of my favorite researchers. The guy is super legit. And, I think that there really is something out there. I just think that they're really low in number. And I think I'm super lucky if this were to be one, this would be a once in a lifetime thing.
Yeah, 100%. Yes.
It blows my mind that, the town we were living in, we could move, 50, 60 miles away and something like this happened. So hopefully that kind of answers something. I mean, there's so much to it. The more in depth you get into it and the more you research that you get into it, the more it becomes, just get deeper and deeper and deeper.
Oh yeah. And you just have more questions and no answers, which, you can either let that just eat you alive or you let it drive you forward, which is what I've chosen to do, because it will just drive you nuts, because you're not gonna get any answers, but it sure as hell is fun to go looking.
Oh, it is. And the funny thing is, I've never been out squatching.
Well, you're about to, because you live in the middle of damn squatch country, so
I know.
you might actually
in
have
fact,
something going on there.
You're going to laugh. My wife just yelled at me because I just bought 3rd Gen NVGs.
Oh, I'm so jealous. No, but see, that's the kind of thing that I even saw somebody just tweeting about this. I don't know if it's Cliff Barrickman or somebody was saying anybody that is really serious about this, especially if you live in a place where it may be going on, for goodness sake, if you have the means to invest in any kind of night vision goggles or thermal, do it, because there are a lot of things that can sound really freaking big and your mind plays tricks on you. And that way, for the most part, if you can get close enough and it's not hiding behind a tree, and you go, okay, well, that was a big old raccoon. Okay, that was, that way you can identify things very quickly. And having disposal of, or at my disposal, I should say, at most of these locations, somebody always had one of these toys, and very expensive toys.
Those toys are the cost of a used car.
I know it. The one that Kirk Brandenburg had while we were at the Brown property was around $5,000, and this was 8 years ago. And I know that they change, iterations. There's new models and all of this and that, but I mean, $5,000, that's nothing to shake a stick at. That's not chump change. But if anybody can ever, I just can't say that enough. And I totally agree with whoever. I saw that on Twitter the other day. I was like, oh my God, yes. Because there are so many times you're like, oh my God, it's something massive over there. And you look and it's just this fat raccoon just digging around in something, and you get carried away and you get excited and everything just kind of gets amplified when you're out there in the bush. But, cool toy, Sean. That is amazing. Well, here's what we'll do.
Not the most expensive one, but from what I hear, 3rd Gen is apparently the best generation that they made for it. So that's why I kind of went that route.
No, that's awesome that you did, especially if you have stuff like that going on. And it's just cool to see what you have going on your property if you're out there in real time, and you can see, oh, there's deer and raccoons and all this other stuff going on. But, well, I want to send you the picture of that book, because I'm just curious. There's other grimoires, but I'm just curious if this is the one, because when you started talking about the cover, I'm like, well, could be, but a lot of them could have the same cover. And then if you want to send me any other pictures that you wouldn't mind, just make sure you let me know if it's for me only or for public consumption.
Yeah.
And then we can also converse more on just your property. And I'm going to try to find out more about just reports in your area, what's going on, as far as times of the year. That'll be kind of interesting to see as we move forward. If it kind of dies down at certain times of the year, which seems to be a lot of times what happens. But we will definitely be keeping in touch, Sean. But before I let you go, okay. Did I skip over anything? Did you need to say anything else?
No, it's just like I said, I'm a wholehearted skeptic that is starting to believe more and more that I do the research, but I'm just digging myself into that rabbit hole. And thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you for taking the time, because I want everyone to know you're not even in the comfort of your home right now. You are sitting in your vehicle where you have service. So thank you so much for being willing to do that for me and for the ITF listeners.
Enough, overlooking a really deep valley right now. It's actually gorgeous. It's dark out and it's about 34 degrees out.
Well, if you see anything, you just get right back on the email and let me know. No, but Sean, thank you so much for taking so much time. I know you've been working so hard, and you just killed an hour and 45 minutes with me. So thank you so much for that.
No, this is truly an honor. Thank you, Shannon.
Well, I'm so-and-so. I was given this name by my parents. I've been to such and such a college. I've done these things in my profession. I produce a little biography. Buddha says, forget it. That's not true. That's some story. That's all gone. That's all past. I want to see the real you are now. Well, nobody knows who that is. Because we don't know ourselves except through listening to our echoes and consulting our memories. But then there's a real you, and that again leads us back to this question. Who are you? That is the real you. We shall see how they play with this exam by the koans to get you to come out of your shell and find out who you really are. First there is summer, and then there is spring. says, when you settle down in the train to read your newspaper and so on, you are not the same person who a little while ago left the platform. If you think you are linking your moments up in a chain. And this is what binds you to the wheel of birth and death. But when you know that every moment in which you are is the only moment, this comes into Zen. A master will say to somebody, get up and walk across the room. And he comes back and he says, where are your footprints? They've gone. So where are you? Who are you? When we are asked who we are, we usually give a kind of recitation of a history.
Now streaming on Peacock.
Deep in the woods stands a lone door.
What's behind the door? Nightmares. Your worst nightmares.
Time to fight your demons.
Who are you?
I'm a weapon.
This girl is a cold soul killer.
I'm gonna end this thing.
Are you like the Terminator?
The Girl in the Woods. A brand new series streaming now only on Peacock.